funds received from the city as a result of the city's settlement and litigation against the Rams football team owner Stan Kroenke and the National Football League, known as the Rams settlement funds, and any accumulated interest shall require an affirmative vote of 2/3 of all members of the Board of Aldermen. So that attached to this resolution really is a rules change. So obviously that's why I'm in front of the Rules Committee. The importance of this really is it's been categorized in the press. I think it's been categorized by us since we've received this lump sum money that these are important, should be transformative funds, and it's important that all four corners of the city are represented. And so really, in my mind, and I think in a lot of residents' minds, the threshold for ensuring that we have widespread support would be a simple rules change to any of these funds before being appropriated. Sort of forces agreement. It prevents rushed or impulsive policy. It also slows down the conversation so that we aren't at political wins or dealing from emotions. It encourages careful discussion before any action, which I think is demanded of us from our constituents. It also helps minority groups have a larger voice.
We launched a mortgage assistance program that we appropriated around $1.9 million for years ago. The vast majority of that money was spent down. We did have a contract with Park Central Development Company. We had gone back and forth with this organization over the past couple of years on the rate of their spend down for mortgage assistance. I think one of the major findings that they saw is that within the region that they operate, providing services, economic development assistance, those sorts of things, the vast majority of the people indicated that they needed rental assistance, not mortgage assistance. And so even though a large pot of money was designated towards this project, the need on the ground was actually something other than what was appropriated. So Park Central was not able to spend down the full amount of this contract.
You mentioned that there was a greater need for rental assistance than mortgage assistance. Is there any reason that this money could not be reallocated to go to rental assistance?
Yeah, so that is a very good question, and that is actually the question that we asked, I believe, when we started talking about the reappropriation process, previous mayoral administration. We got some feedback that the uses for those funds were not similar enough to where we could slide that over into rental assistance. And I think at one point we had considered recommending another board bill to get the money transferred to that use. But ultimately it was decided that we would hold on to it for reappropriations for another use.
And I think that touches on the trickiness of when we're working with federal dollars, that there are a lot of restrictions and very, very specific directives on how the money can be used. So what I'm hearing from you is that it just wasn't going to qualify, that we could just slide that money over. It just wasn't a similar enough use. I'm seeing that there's a variety of causes for like unspent money, whether it's, but the common issue that sticks out to me is staffing.
Yes.
That it is difficult to staff up. It's difficult to get programs up and running. These can take months, if not years sometimes, especially to set up a brand new program.
Yes.
So in each situation is a little bit different, but generally that mostly what was happening here, that staffing was an issue.
Almost universally, every entity since I've gotten into this space, staffing has been a constant thorn in their side, either to maintain or obtain really good trained staffing. Remember, a lot of the programs that our providers have are deeply intensive. Therapists, wound specialists, counselors. These are just not a lot of folks that you're just going to find in your everyday job market. And so some of them have had tremendous difficulty finding good, well-trainable staff. And I think that's universal across all of the entities that I've found.
And I think when we're looking at obviously these are all serving a population that we would describe as, I think, vulnerable or
Yes.
People that are a little less resourced, a little less advantaged in life. And that's a difficult population to serve as well. And so
Yes.
There's a lot of things that I think make it difficult to get these programs up and running and then reach everyone that needs that help. And then it's harder to do on a shortened timeline as well. So I can understand that.
I've recently just got several calls from organizations that are in fear of losing funds from this department because the work that they do is now up in jeopardy. So this is not this is not at you all. I just want to make sure that I'm comfortable going back to my neighborhood and saying, while water is important, I also think in these challenging neighborhoods, it's also important to make sure that we have additional resources to unchallenge them, if that makes sense. Absolutely. And $70,000 does not seem like a lot of money that a program could spend down before 2026. When you're talking about millions, 600 or 600 some thousand, 700 some thousand, that makes sense. We're talking about 70 some thousand that you're saying cannot be committed. And I know some of this also is politics of, we're trying to find money for an entity that is extremely important, but I'm not trying to rob Peter to pay Paul either. And I know that I get the going, so let me slow down.
If I can help you, Alderman, the 667,000 that they had received, they even acknowledged with all their best efforts, after going through and knowing they had these outstanding invoices, they even admitted that they didn't think they could spend.
I just want to add something just to that question is really important. I think a lot of these contracts aren't being terminated, and I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's contracts, certain amounts that they don't believe can be spent of the contract. So some of these amounts were much larger contracts, and there's a certain amount that they don't believe can be spent. So I just want to make sure that's the language we're using.
Whatever language, we don't have to say termination, I'll say allocation. Make you feel better, Alderwoman?
Yeah, it's just a real portion of a contract that can't be spent by the deadline is just what's happening. Because I don't want anyone listening to think that contracts are being terminated if they are more that, a certain amount is projected based on monthly invoices that, if a monthly invoice is coming monthly and they tell us that this is how much they're spending on staff, this is how much they're spending on the program, we know how many months are left in the year, and there's a certain amount of money that's going to not be able to be spent based on clear records that are coming in. That is the money that we're talking about. So.
And I think some of the confusion might be is that has not been fully communicated up the chain. And so when the letters were sent out, maybe it is the higher up officials that didn't know as much from inside of the organization. So I think that is some of the discrepancies that we are seeing. But OVP did work really hard with each individual program manager and met with them several times and got their input on what they thought they couldn't use. And sometimes when you have $500,000, you can only physically spend so much. They only have so much money in the bank, and we reimburse them. They can't be taking out debt to be reimbursed. So there's sometimes only so much physically that these great organizations can spend in a month.
When I'm thinking about recovery, I think of places that have also experienced disaster and looking at the timelines on which they recovered. Places like Altadena, California, they lost a lot of homes in the Eden fire in January of 2025. And on December 4th, 2025, they celebrated their first fully rebuilt home. So just context-wise, that's in California. It's a much richer state than ours. It's a state that actually cares about its cities. And yet the people in that community, it took almost a full year just to rebuild one home. And that's because these things take time. I understand the enormous effort it takes to set up a recovery office, especially when there's supposed to be a federal office that does this. And, you know, I heard Katrina mentioned again tonight, and Katrina is a great example of a storm that was horribly, really just an awful response to it. And the federal government learned from that, and it improved. And then when the Joplin tornado happened in this state, the federal response was fantastic. They set up mobile homes, they set up community centers, they helped rebuild their school, their hospital. And that was a much worse tornado than hit our city. But they got way more than we ever received from the federal government.
What they were speaking to is about $25 million in MHDC funds, or Missouri Housing Trust Fund, that was allocated at the same time as Senate Bill 1 of the $100 million that was allocated to the state, to the city, as was allocated through the state of Missouri for the city of St. Louis. But those funds are all held by the state of Missouri, and they set the terms of how those will be allocated. Of course, we advocate and have those conversations, but those are state funds. The $25 million for MHDC was allocated toward any disaster across the state of Missouri. Organizations or nonprofits can apply for funds, and they can receive up to $1 million grant at a time based on that investment. We as the city have received about $5.4 million, if I remember the number correctly, of those funds allocated to St. Louis agencies, one of which is the city, one and our office, which has about $1 million. Two were allocated to disaster case management organizations who have home repair dollars. That includes LifeWise SDL, that includes Salvation Army, and also includes Catholic Charities. And there was a lot of dollars allocated to housing. Those are represented in the numbers. So what Jim was mentioning is that as we spend down the $1 million, and we have to show it fully spent down, we can go back and ask for more. And so a critical strategy is getting the groups who have the funds to be able to spend those in communities so they can apply for more.
I think that's really an important thing that's being missed tonight, is that when government is spending money, government has to spend money according to very specific rules. Like we are, well, first of all, we as a city are barred by the Missouri Constitution from using taxpayer dollars for direct aid. I'm going to say that again. We're barred from using taxpayer dollars for direct aid. We cannot just write a check. So we also have a charter, right? And the charter was written at a time when the city government was super corrupt. So when they responded to that, they wrote a charter that put tons of checks and balances on the money. And it takes a long time to move money out of the city. But I've been seeing the recovery office and the board of E&A hold special meetings, do whatever they have to move these dollars faster, to work with our systems to spend this money. But I remember hearing a couple meetings ago that, like, if we're removing a tree stump and using like federal dollars to do it, that we have to do an archaeological dig. I mean, these are the policies that were put in place by well-intentioned people at one point trying to protect taxpayer money, but now they are a hindrance to us helping people. And I think that's a great example of how the best intentions, that they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? Like that is exactly where we're at right now, where we are having a difficult time spending money because of all the regulations that were meant to protect that money from taxpayers.